priorities for you was to have a cabinet that was gender balanced. Why was that so important to you?
Because it's 2015.
Why is it that he can't see when he silences women, when he yells and screams at them, when he says that their experiences are just different perspectives? He is demeaning all women and showing what a fake feminist he is.
What a difference 4 years makes. In the midst of the SNC-Lavalin affair, critics are challenging the Prime Minister's self-professed feminism. After all, he's responsible for turfing 2 female former cabinet ministers and accused of trying to silence them, at least one of them, and all because his critics say they tried to speak truth to powerful men. The annual Daughters of the Vote event in Ottawa, several young women in attendance turned their back on the Prime Minister as he gave his address. Others grilled him on his commitment to equality as well as reconciliation and the environment. With all the attention on the Prime Minister's handling of this controversy, members of the opposition and grassroots feminists alike have been calling him out. It begs the question, is Trudeau still the Prime Minister who champions feminism? For more on the question, we've invited 2 guests to the program. Farah Khan is a sexual violence support worker and consent educator at Ryerson University, and Tanya Talaga, Toronto Star columnist and investigative reporter with a focus on Indigenous issues. They join us here on set. So, all right, let's start with this. Farah, let's begin to ask you, and I'll ask a question to both of you. How would you define a feminist Prime Minister?
That's a huge question. For me, it's someone who's committed to gender justice and gender equity and shows that in the policies that they create, in the relationships that they build, and in the continuing idea that women should be leading these conversations, but we need male allies. And my hope for a feminist Prime Minister is one day that we don't have a man always doing that, but we have a woman.
Okay, your definition, Tanya?
Well, a feminist Prime Minister to me means someone who knows something about equality, someone who believes in equal rights, someone who believes in the advancement of women. And I think that we've seen a mixed bag coming from this Prime Minister. And I agree, it would be great to see a woman in the role of promoting women at the toppest level.
Okay, so Tanya's going to anticipate the next question to you, Farah. Is this a feminist Prime Minister, the one we have now?
Well, I think there's lots of ways to be a feminist, right? And so there's an idea that this is a Prime Minister that we've seen actually build up WAGE, which is the Women and Gender Equality Office. So we've actually have a department now. We had a Conservative government for a decade that decimated the funding to feminist movements, to grassroots movements, that pushed a rhetoric of racist agenda around feminism, so ideas of the Barbaric Cultural Practices Act. So we've had a Prime Minister that's come in after a decade of decimating the feminist movement, I believe, by the Conservative government, who's been changing that. And so do I think he's a feminist, or that we have a feminist government right now? Absolutely, I think that this has been, but do I think it's perfect? No, and I think there's a lot of challenges with it, and we have to keep pushing the conversation, and that's what the Daughters of the Vote did. They're pushing the conversation, and we have to keep doing that.
Tanya, what are the challenges?
Well, let's look at what he's just done recently. I mean, Jody, Wilson-Raybould, and Jane Philpott. I mean, both women out for speaking their truth, for speaking their mind. I mean, these are 2 highly placed individuals, really well respected. They both did incredible jobs in their portfolios. And then when push comes to shove, if you don't toe the party line, you get shown the door. That to me doesn't seem like the actions of a feminist Prime Minister. I know he keeps talking about, well, in politics, this is how we play the game. It's like everyone is a member of the caucus and we all move in this one sort of, blob. And if you don't agree with what we have to say, there's the door. What kind of message is that? I mean, that's not what my mom taught me. My mom always taught me to speak your truth and to say, this is what I heard. And if I'm asked to do something that I believe is not right, is unethical or wrong, I'm going to say something. I'm not going to join everybody else in the big bubble and say, okay, whatever, doesn't matter what I think. What do you think? That's not being feminist.
Marion Monsef the minister has put out a list talking about strategy of against gender-based violence, higher sentences for repeat offenders involving domestic violence, stricter bail conditions, 40,000 childcare spaces, flexible parental leave, on and on. Is some of what the Trudeau government has accomplished as far as assisting women across this country being lost in this debate?
Well, I think we're losing a lot in this debate because there's a real focus on the SNC-Lavalin piece, but there's been good things that have come forward in the budget and has come forward in the past 4 years. But that doesn't mean we don't have to deal with it. So I think it's like, how do we simultaneously have conversations about holding people accountable, having conversations and justice around that, at the same time recognizing the good things that have been done. And also that it's not just the government that's been pushing this feminist agenda. Feminist movements in Canada don't come from the government. They come from grassroots movements. They come from feminists saying at the front lines, this is not okay, you need to change this. So that means feminists have been pushing around childcare. That means Indigenous women have been saying we need a missing and murdered inquiry. That doesn't come from the government, that comes from us.
Tanya, I see you nodding in assent there.
Yeah, but she's right. You know, it does come from us, and it is coming from us at all different levels. You know, as Indigenous women and just as women in general. I mean, Jane and Jody, what they've done is exactly that. They've pushed back. They've shown no, actually, it's not okay. We believe this is a story of political interference, is what they're saying at the end of the day. It's not a story about who taped whom or who did what. And you know what? The feminist agenda of this government, of all of those changes you just mentioned, they're all needed. They're all things that have to happen in this country anyway. I don't think that's part of this argument. I think that, you know, when we're looking at the story of what happened, you know, in the last, well, what is it, 7 weeks now, to Jane and to Jody and to Selena as well, like all other women in that caucus. I mean, what's really going on? And can you stand up and speak your truth as a woman in government? That's a good question.
So what do you think is really going on?
Well, like what I was saying before, I really do think this is a story of political interference at its heart. You know, let's think about what was on those tapes. Let's think about what does this mean? This is about corporate bribery. You know, this is actually, it's a totally different issue in a way, you know.
We should say alleged, because there's been no conviction registered in this case.
Yes, that's true, that's true.
Yep.
But, you know, when somebody asks somebody to do something that they don't feel it's right, and you feel like you're being bullied, yeah, you say something, you know. And what happened with Jody is she tried to say something for a while, and nobody listened, you know. It's like they didn't want to hear what she had to say.
Okay, 6 months away from the election. Where does this then leave the debate in terms of the parties that you'd be looking to and the voices you want to hear and the commitments you want to hear heading up to that October election?
Well, I find it interesting that the rhetoric that's been coming out of the Conservatives has been really pushing this idea of fake feminism. Like, we have to look at the source here. Here was a Conservative government in a decade actually pushed really horrible things that actually set women's rights back. And so if they're saying these things around fake feminism, I want them to show me a platform that actually affirms women's right to choose, reproductive justice, Indigenous women's autonomy. I want to make sure that if we have a government that we're going to have in place, whatever government it is, that actually is feminist, be it the NDP, be it Liberal, be it Conservative, be it Green. But I want to see a conversation about not just about who's a fake feminist and who's not, but actually an agenda and a platform that speaks to the lived realities of women and what they're going to do for us.
To your point, the Daughters of the Vote turned their back, some, not all, but some turned their back on Justin Trudeau, but a number walked out when Andrew Scheer addressed them as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Tanya, what does the debate have to be? As you've talked about the issue at mind, but what about the longer term goals of women, and especially Indigenous women, heading into that election?
We need as many women possible running. We need women running all over this country. We need women running in urban centers. We need them running in rural centers. You know, it's time for us to get into the political game a lot more. I mean, why was Daughters of the Vote created? Daughters of the Vote was created because there are woefully few women in politics. It's getting better, you know, but I think out of the 2015 election, it was 88 women elected out of 388 seats. I mean, we can do better than that. And that's definitely part of the longer game issue here. And you're right, in platforms. What are the parties actually saying, you know? And we have to vote with our feet. Look at what the platforms are. And do they have interests that align with us? Then vote. But also run, I think.
Just got about a minute left, but just to ask a generality here in terms of the advancement of the issues. In the recent events of the last 7 weeks, have we taken a step back, not just through the Trudeau government or for other parties? Where are we in that progress?
Well, I think where we are in some ways is that we're losing the conversation of what feminist work is supposed to be, right? The fight for gender justice, what those issues are. But I also think we're having conversations about women in leadership, and that is important. We need to continue having the place where, how do we not just get women to run, but how do we support women when they're there? How do we ensure that there's not just gender equality for when you step into an office, but from the front door to the back door? And so that's important.
Last word to you, Tanya.
I totally agree with you. It's not just about the running while it's so important, but it's also who's in the back room. Because as we've seen in the last little while, it's who's in the back room also really makes a difference, you know. And these people too, they're not elected, but yet they hold considerable power in politics. And we have to make sure that they're kind, reasonable people that are doing it, and women there.